What's worse than getting arrested? Getting arrested by a fake cop. Big Shaq steps out of a restaurant only to be stopped by a flashing siren and a shady officer demanding $5,000 on the spot. But there's just one problem. Shaq knows his rights, and he knows a scam when he sees one. As the tension builds, Shaq plays along until real cops show up and recognize the scammer. The fake cop panics, realizing his plan just backfired on the worst possible target. What happens next? Let's just say the internet will never let him live it down. Keep watching. Hey, real quick, before we get into this wild story, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment. Where are you watching from? Shaq stepped out of the restaurant, patting his stomach after a satisfying meal. The crisp night air was refreshing after the warmth inside. He adjusted his jacket, preparing to head back to his car when a police siren split the silence, sending a jolt through the otherwise peaceful street. Shaq froze mid-step, blinking in confusion. He hadn't seen any patrol cars nearby when he arrived, yet now a sleek, unmarked black sedan had pulled up to the curb. The door swung open with a sharp creak, and a uniformed officer stepped out, his hand resting on his holster. His boots crunched against the pavement as he took a few purposeful strides toward Shaq. "Sir, stop right there!" The cop's voice was firm, authoritative, but something about his tone felt off. Shaq raised an eyebrow, glancing around. A few pedestrians had paused, watching with mild curiosity, but no one seemed alarmed enough to intervene. The street was quiet, lit by a few flickering streetlights. This wasn't exactly a high-crime area. The officer squared his stance in front of Shaq, giving him a long, hard look. His uniform was neat but slightly wrinkled, his belt tight around his waist, and his badge glinted under the streetlights. Yet there was something about his expression, a smirk tugging at the corners of his lips, that made Shaq uneasy. "You got a warrant on you, buddy." Shaq let out a short chuckle, tilting his head. "A warrant? For me?" He pointed at himself, voice laced with disbelief. "Come on, man. You sure you got the right guy?" The officer, whose name tag read Daniels, barely blinked. "Yeah, unpaid fines, suspended license. Got your name flagged in the system." Shaq crossed his arms. "That's funny, 'cause last time I checked, I had no fines. My license is clean, and I sure as hell don't have a warrant." Daniels held his ground. "Look, we can do this the easy way or the hard way. Your choice." Shaq stared at him for a moment, then took a step forward, towering over the officer. Normally, real cops didn't flinch, but Daniels, his fingers twitched slightly, his smirk wavered. "All right," Shaq said, voice calm but firm. "Show me your badge." For the briefest second, hesitation flashed across Daniels' face. Then, with an exaggerated sigh, he yanked a badge from his pocket and flipped it open, so fast that Shaq barely got a glimpse before shoving it back. Shaq smirked. "Didn't get a good look at that. Mind showing me again?" Daniel's jaw tightened. "I don't have time for games. Hands on the car now." A couple walking past slowed down, their eyes darting between the two men. One of them whispered something to the other. Shaq noticed. Daniels did too. And for the first time, a flicker of something that looked like nervousness crossed his face. Daniels squared his shoulders and took a step closer, voice lowering. "Let's cut to the chase, big guy. Pay me $5,000 right now, and I'll make this all go away." Shaq stood his ground, arms crossed over his chest, towering over the so-called officer. His deep voice was steady, unwavering. "A warrant? For what?" Daniels barely flinched, his smirk still plastered on his face. He took a slow step back, flipping open a small notepad as if checking something. "Unpaid fines. License suspension," he muttered, tapping his pen against the paper. "You've had multiple violations, buddy. Should have taken care of them before getting caught like this." Shaq arched an eyebrow. Caught? Now he was certain. This guy had no idea who he was messing with. "You sure about that?" Shaq asked, tilting his head. "Because last time I checked, my license was clean. No fines, no suspensions. So why don't you tell me what this is really about?" Daniels didn't break character. He let out an exaggerated sigh and flipped another page in his notebook, pretending to read details that didn't exist. "Look, man," he said in a fake authoritative tone, "you can argue all you want, but my system says otherwise. Either we can take a trip downtown, or you can handle this." Right here. Shaq narrowed his eyes. Handle this? That confirmed it. No real cop offered quick solutions like this, especially not in a dimly lit street with no backup. Daniel stuffed his notebook back into his pocket, stepping a little closer. He lowered his voice as if trying to sound reasonable. Listen, assistant. You don't want to go through all that hassle, the paperwork, the fines, the time wasted sitting in a holding cell. He shrugged. I'm just trying to help you out, man. Shaq smirked, shaking his head. Help me out? He repeated. Daniels nodded. Yeah, we can settle this right here. Pay up now and I'll let you walk. Shaq crossed his arms again, looking down at the man with amusement. How much? He asked, playing along. Daniels ran a hand over his chin, pretending to calculate. 5 grand, he finally said, stuffing his hands in his pockets. Cash or card? Shaq let out a low chuckle. This was getting ridiculous. A fake cop, a fake warrant, and now an overpriced bribe? He exhaled slowly, letting the tension linger before locking eyes with Daniels. All right, Shaq said smoothly. Show me your badge. For the first time, Daniels hesitated. His hand twitched at his side before he quickly yanked the badge from his pocket and flashed it in front of Shaq's face. Too fast for anyone to properly read it, before shoving it back. Shaq's smirk widened. Didn't quite catch that, he said. Mind showing it to me again? Daniel's jaw tightened. His confidence was slipping. The fake cop squared his shoulders and took a step closer, voice lowering. I don't have time for games, big guy. Hands on the car. Now! Daniel's hand moved fast, pulling out the badge, flashing it for barely a second before stuffing it right back into his pocket. Shaq, standing a full foot taller than the man, didn't even flinch. But in that brief moment, he caught something off. The badge was cheap, plastic-looking, like something you'd find in a kid's toy set. Not only that, but Daniel's uniform was missing something important. No name tag. Shaq had met plenty of real officers in his life, had worked with law enforcement on different projects. He knew the standard look of a real uniform, the stance, the way they carried themselves. And this guy? He didn't have it. Daniels took a slow step closer, his fake authority still intact. Look, he said, lowering his voice, I get it. You don't want to make this a big deal, so let's keep it simple. He smirked, glancing around the empty street. We can settle this here. Pay $5,000 now, and I won't take you in. Shaq inhaled deeply, tilting his head. $5,000? He repeated, as if considering it. Daniels nodded. That's right. Shaq stroked his chin. Huh, that's funny. Daniels frowned. What is? Shaq leaned in slightly, his deep voice dropping lower. I know real cops don't work like that. For the first time, Daniels hesitated. His confidence flickered, like a dimming streetlight. You saying I'm not real? He scoffed, crossing his arms. Shaq grinned. I'm saying something ain't adding up. Daniels forced a chuckle, but there was nervousness behind it. Man, I don't know what you think you know, but I ain't got all night. He gestured toward Shaq's car. So what's it gonna be? Pay up or take a ride downtown? Shaq sighed dramatically, shaking his head. Well, since you put it that way, Daniels nodded. Smart man. Shaq reached into his pocket. Daniels watched closely, anticipating a wallet. But when Shaq's hand emerged, it wasn't holding cash. It was holding a phone. Let me just call my lawyer real quick, Shaq said casually, unlocking the screen. Daniel's face twitched. Hey, he stammered, reaching out. That's not necessary. Shaq raised an eyebrow. It's not? No need to get lawyers involved, Daniels said quickly. This is just a small issue. Let's handle it here. Shaq smirked. Now he had him. Shaq scrolled through his contacts, hovering his thumb over a name. Yeah, I think I'll go ahead and make that call. Daniel's fake bravado cracked. His eyes darted left and right, looking for an escape. Daniel's fingers clenched around Shaq's wrist, his grip firm but shaky. His voice, once dripping with fake confidence, now had an edge of desperation. You're resisting arrest now? He growled, trying to sound authoritative. Shaq didn't move, didn't flinch. He simply turned his head, staring down at the man gripping his wrist. Daniels looked small next to him, like a kid trying to pull a tree out of the ground with his bare hands. The street had been quiet a moment ago, but now a few pedestrians had stopped to watch. A woman across the sidewalk slowly raised her phone, hitting the record button. Another man a few feet away did the same, mumbling to his friend. Shaq exhaled. Resisting arrest? He echoed, tilting his head. For what exactly? Daniel's grip tightened. Obstruction of justice. Interfering with a police investigation. Shaq let out a low chuckle. Oh, so now it's an investigation? Daniels ignored the remark and gave a sharp tug, trying to force Shaq toward the unmarked car behind him. Let's go. Now. Shaq planted his feet firmly. He wasn't going anywhere. You got a real badge? Shaq asked. Daniel's jaw clenched. I don't need to prove anything to you. Shaq smirked. Oh, but you do. See, people are watching now. He nodded toward the small but growing crowd, phones raised. Daniels hesitated, shifting on his feet. He glanced at the people filming, then back at Shaq. His grip loosened slightly, but he doubled down. You think a crowd's gonna save you? He hissed. Move it, or I'll add more charges. Shaq sighed dramatically. Man, you just keep adding charges like toppings on a pizza. Daniels gave another yank, but Shaq still didn't budge. You done? Shaq asked, raising an eyebrow. Daniel's face twitched. He had no backup, no real authority, just a growing audience watching his act crumble. A voice from the crowd rang out. That cop doesn't even have a name tag. Another person added, Yeah, that ain't right. Daniel's eyes darted to the voices. He was losing control of the situation fast. Shaq, still unmoved, smirked. Yeah, no, I think I'll stay right here. Daniel's fingers twitched, his mind racing. His next move had to be bold, desperate, and that's exactly what he was about to do. Shaq's thumb hovered over his phone screen. With one tap, he sent a single word to a trusted contact. Now! Daniels had no idea what was coming. The fake cop's grip tightened on Shaq's wrist, his fingers digging into Shaq's skin like he actually had control. He didn't. Let's go! Daniels snapped, yanking harder. Shaq barely moved. Instead, he smirked. Actually, let's wait a minute. Daniels frowned. For what? Shaq tilted his head, pretending to listen to something in the distance. Then, like a perfectly timed movie scene, the sound of real police sirens cut through the air. Daniels flinched. His head snapped toward the sound, and for the first time, real fear flickered in his eyes. Shaq watched him closely. Something wrong, officer? Daniels licked his lips, releasing Shaq's wrist so fast it was like he'd been burned. This ain't got nothing to do with them. Shaq chuckled. Oh, I think it does. The crowd around them had grown. More bystanders had their phones out, recording everything. Murmurs rippled through them as a marked police car turned the corner. Red and blue lights flashing. Daniel's breathing grew shallow. He took a tiny step back, gripping the belt of his fake uniform like it could somehow protect him. The patrol car screeched to a stop, and two real officers stepped out. One of them, a tall, broad-shouldered black man in his late 40s, removed his sunglasses, squinting at the scene. His eyes landed on Daniels, and instantly his face darkened. Daniels? The officer's voice was laced with disbelief and anger. What the hell are you doing? Daniels looked like he had just seen a ghost. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. Shaq folded his arms, enjoying the show. The second officer, a Latina woman with sharp eyes, stepped forward. She scanned Daniel's uniform, then turned to Shaq. Sir, what's going on here? Shaq jerked a thumb at Daniels. Your boy here just tried to arrest me. Said I had a warrant. Oh, and he wanted $5 grand to make it a go away. The woman's brows shot up. Excuse me? The older officer's nostrils flared as he took a step closer to Daniels. Tell me you didn't just pull this scam on him. Daniels let out a nervous chuckle, hands raised. This is all just a misunderstanding. You thought? The officer cut him off, his voice sharp. You don't even have a badge anymore, Daniels. What do you think you're doing impersonating a cop? Shaq raised an eyebrow. Any more? The officer turned to him and sighed. This idiot was fired last year. Shaq whistled low. Damn. So he wasn't even a real cop when he pulled this stunt? The Latina officer shook her head, arms crossed. Nope. And if what you're saying is true, that means we've got a much bigger problem. Daniel's hands trembled as he took another step back. His mind was racing, searching for an escape plan. Shaq leaned in slightly, lowering his voice. Hey, Daniels? Daniels flinched. Shaq grinned. You're about to have a very bad day. Daniel's eyes darted between the two real officers, Shaq and the growing crowd. He knew what was coming. His only option now was to run. Daniels let out a nervous chuckle, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. His confidence, which had been sky-high minutes ago, was crumbling fast. Look, man, this ain't what it looks like, he stammered, hands twitching. I was just making an arrest. The older officer narrowed his eyes. An arrest? His voice was laced with disbelief. Daniels, you don't even work for us anymore. Daniel's face twitched. He forced a dry swallow. I got reinstated. The officer let out a sharp breath and shook his head. Nah, we fired you last year. Shaq tilted his head, watching the scene unfold like a spectator at a movie premiere. He could smell the desperation rolling off Daniels. Ooh, Shaq muttered, grinning. Now this is getting interesting. The crowd around them had thickened, phones raised, capturing every second. The murmurs grew louder as people whispered among themselves. A young man in a hoodie turned to his friend. Yo, this dude really thought he could arrest Shaq? Daniels wiped sweat off his forehead. Hold up now. This is all a big misunderstanding. The Latina officer scoffed. A misunderstanding? You impersonated a cop, tried to scam a man out of $5,000, and you picked the wrong guy. Daniel's hands went up in defense. I was just doing my job. The older officer took a step forward. Your job? You got caught stealing from evidence lockers, Daniels. You're lucky you weren't arrested then. Shaq let out a low whistle. Man, this just keeps getting better. Daniel's face paled. His eyes darted around the crowd like a cornered animal. Look, I didn't have a choice, he blurted out. I needed money. The officer's jaw tightened. And your solution was shaking down innocent people? What, you thought you'd just put the uniform back on and go back to scamming folks? Daniel stammered, but Shaq cut in. Yo, let me get this straight. He gestured between them. This dude got fired for stealing and then decided, you know what? I should keep pretending I'm a cop. The Latina officer sighed. Pretty much. A woman in the crowd suddenly gasped. Wait, I know him. All eyes snapped to her. She took a hesitant step forward, clutching her purse. He tried to pull this same stunt on my husband last week. He said my husband had a parking ticket and needed to pay right away, or he'd get arrested. The energy shifted. More voices erupted from the crowd. Yo, I think this guy tried to stop me outside a gas station last month. He pulled me over 2 weeks ago and tried to fine me for speeding. My cousin said some fake cop tried to shake him down last month. This has got to be him. Daniel's breath came in short, panicked bursts. His gaze darted from face to face, from phone to phone. This was spiraling out of control. Shaq leaned down slightly, looking directly into Daniel's wide eyes. Whew, he exhaled dramatically. Buddy, it's not looking good for you right now. Daniels let out a shaky laugh, stepping back. Okay, listen. But Shaq wasn't done. Matter of fact, he turned to the officers. Y'all check his car yet? What if he's got more fake tickets in there? Maybe even a list of people he scammed. The Latina officer exchanged a look with her partner. Pop the trunk. Daniels flinched. Hey, come on now. The older officer ignored him, jerking his chin toward the unmarked car. Keys, now. Daniels hesitated, his mind racing. He was out of options. And then he made his worst decision yet. With a sudden burst of movement, Daniels turned and bolted. A murmur spread through the crowd as more bystanders gathered. Some were whispering, others were recording, and at least one person had started live streaming. Yo, is that Shaq? A voice asked from the back. Shaq didn't respond. He just kept his arms crossed, towering over the situation like a living statue. Daniel, still sweating, was shifting on his feet, looking like a man trapped in a corner. One of the real officers, a stern-looking man with graying hair, stepped forward. Daniels, hand over your ID. Daniels forced a dry swallow. I left it in my car. The officer's lips pressed into a thin line. That's convenient. Shaq smirked, stepping aside. So, Want to explain yourself, buddy? His voice was light, almost amused, but there was steel beneath it. Daniels held his hands up, palms out, his voice turning smooth. Too smooth. Look, this is just a big misunderstanding. I used to be a cop. That's all. A woman suddenly gasped from the crowd. Wait, I know this guy. She pushed through, clutching her purse. He tried to scam my husband last week. Said he had an unpaid fine and needed to pay in cash right there or he'd get arrested. The air shifted. Daniels paled. That wasn't me. More voices joined in. Yo, this dude stopped me outside a bar last month. Said my license was suspended. Told me I could fix it for a fee. He pulled my uncle over 2 weeks ago. Took $300 off him for reckless driving. Bruh, I knew he looked familiar. The real officers exchanged looks. Daniel's breathing turned shallow, his fingers twitching at his sides. His world was crumbling. Shaq tilted his head. Man, sounds like you've been real busy. Daniels forced a nervous laugh, but his legs were already shifting. His body language screamed one thing. He was about to run. The gray-haired officer must have noticed because his hand moved toward his belt. Don't even think about it, Daniels. But Daniels was already whispering to himself. I can fix this. Then he bolted. The crowd erupted as Daniels took off, shoving people aside. Shaq didn't move. He just watched, a slow grin spreading across his face. Yeah, he muttered, shaking his head. That ain't gonna end well for him. Daniel's shoes slapped against the pavement as he through the crowd, shoving people out of his way. Move! Move! He shouted, desperation thick in his voice. Shaq? He didn't move an inch. Hands in his pockets, he simply turned his head and watched the chaos unfold. Man, he muttered, shaking his head. He's not making it far. The two real officers took off after Daniels, their radios crackling as they called for backup. Daniels lunged toward a narrow alleyway between two buildings, hoping to disappear into the shadows. He was fast, but panic made him sloppy. His shoulder clipped a trash can, sending it clattering to the ground. A stray cat hissed and darted away. Daniels, stop! One of the officers shouted, like that was going to happen. Daniels sprinted harder, his breathing ragged. His mind raced. He needed a way out, fast. Then he saw his chance. Up ahead, a chain-link fence blocked the alley's exit, but behind it, an open street. If he could just climb it fast enough, he might actually, bam! Daniels didn't see the cyclist. A man on a bright yellow bike had just turned into the alley, completely unaware of the oncoming human disaster. Before Daniels could react, the front wheel slammed into his knees, sending him airborne. His arms flailed, his eyes went wide. And then he crashed, face first into a pile of garbage bags. The cyclist toppled over too, rolling onto the pavement. Dude, what the hell? Daniels groaned, trying to push himself up, his face scrunched in disgust. Oh, come on, he gagged. His hands were covered in something sticky. What is this? Before he could get an answer, a massive shadow fell over him. Still on his hands and knees, Daniels looked up slowly, his stomach dropping. Shaq was right there. The giant stood over him, arms crossed, staring down with that signature smirk. Man, Shaq said, shaking his head. That was brutal. Daniels blinked. You got here that fast? Shaq shrugged. I didn't move. Right then, the two real officers caught up, both breathing hard. One of them grinned. Damn, that was easier than expected. Daniels groaned, burying his face in the garbage. Shaq squatted down beside him. So, how's that fixing this plan working out for you? Daniels winced as cold metal snapped around his wrists. You really thought you'd get away with this? One of the officers muttered as he tightened the handcuffs. Daniels didn't answer. His chest rose and fell rapidly, his mind still reeling from his disastrous escape attempt. Just minutes ago, he had control, barking fake orders, pretending to be the law. Now, he was covered in garbage, his knees scraped from the fall, and the world around him was watching. A dozen smartphones were pointed in his direction. Bystanders whispered, laughed, recorded. Someone in the crowd muttered, "Man scammed the wrong guy." Daniel's throat felt dry. He looked up. Shaq was standing over him, arms crossed. the same infuriating smirk on his face. "Where's that big attitude now?" Shaq said, squatting beside him. Daniels tried to force out a cocky grin, but it didn't land. "I was just trying to make some cash," he stammered. Shaq's eyebrows shot up. "Oh, so you just steal from people for a living?" Daniel's mouth opened, but nothing came out. One of the cops shook his head. "Yeah? Well, now you're going to jail." He grabbed Daniel's arm and started lifting him to his feet. Daniel struggled. "Wait, come on, man. I I can fix this. I can make it right." Shaq chuckled, standing to his full height. "Fix it? Like how? You gonna refund all the people you scammed?" Daniel's mouth twitched. Shaq let out a deep sigh, rubbing his chin. "See, man, that's the thing about frauds. Y'all are real bold until you get caught. Then it's always, 'I can fix this. I was just desperate. I didn't mean it.'" He tilted his head. "Which one is it, Daniels?" Daniels stayed quiet. Shaq shook his head. "That's what I thought." The officers led Daniels toward the waiting squad car, his shoes scraping against the pavement. Then a new voice spoke up. "Hey!" Everyone turned. A middle-aged woman stepped forward from the growing crowd, phone in hand. Her face was flushed, her grip on the phone tight. "I knew I recognized him," she spat, stepping closer. "This is the same guy who pulled this trick on my husband last month." A few other murmurs rippled through the crowd. "Wait, yeah, he stopped my son once. He told me my license was suspended and demanded $500 cash. Dude, this guy's been running this scam for a while." Daniel shrunk in the officer's grip. I don't know what they're talking about," he stammered. "They're lying." One of the real cops squinted at him. "You sure about that?" He turned toward the woman. "Ma'am, do you have proof?" She flipped her phone around. On the screen, a grainy security camera screenshot. Daniels, standing by a car, wearing the same fake uniform. The officer grinned. "Well, well, well." He looked at Daniels. "Looks like we got more to charge you with." Daniels groaned, his head dropping. Shaq chuckled, shaking his head. "Man, the internet is going to have fun with you." The officers dragged Daniels the last few feet toward the squad car, crowd still recording. Daniels looked around one last time, desperate for a way out. No one sympathized. The officer opened the car door, but before Daniels could be shoved inside, Shaq called out, "Hey, Daniels." Daniels hesitated. Shaq smirked. "Enjoy being viral." The door slammed shut and the squad car pulled away as the internet kept recording. The video hit the internet like wildfire. Within minutes, clips of the fake arrest flooded social media. Headlines screamed across platforms. "Fake cop tries to arrest Shaq, fails miserably." "Scammer gets caught trying to con Shaquille O'Neal. Instant karma." The most hilarious scam fail you'll see this year. Everywhere, people were laughing, reposting, and memeing the disaster. One of the most viral clips, Daniels smugly telling Shaq, "You got a warrant on you, buddy," cut immediately to him getting handcuffed and thrown into the squad car. The internet ate it up. Comments rolled in by the thousands. "Bro really thought he could arrest Shaq, LMAO. Dude went from 'I'm the law' to 'please don't take me to jail real quick.' Shaq stayed calm the whole time. That's how you handle a scammer." Celebrities joined in. Kevin Hart retweeted the video with, "Man, imagine trying to scam Shaq. He got more connections than the police department itself." Snoop Dogg posted, "Somebody tell me what jail this dude in." I got jokes ready. Even sports pages picked it up. ESPN tweeted, "Shaq's defense was legendary on the court, and apparently in real life too." Then came the deep dives. A few internet sleuths quickly put together a timeline of Daniel's scams. Reddit threads started surfacing with people sharing their own run-ins with fake officers. A news station dug up Daniel's history of fraud, revealing that he'd been fired from law enforcement years ago. A TikTok user found an old mugshot of him from a past scam. The internet had all the receipts. And Daniels? He was finished. Meanwhile, Shaq was relaxing at home, watching it all unfold. His phone buzzed non-stop with notifications. His assistant called. "Shaq, you're trending. Again." Shaq smirked, scrolling through Twitter. Man, the internet works fast. A friend FaceTimed him, laughing hysterically. Bro, you gotta see this meme. Shaq clicked on it. It was a side-by-side image. Left side, Daniels in his fake uniform, trying to act tough. Right side, Daniels in handcuffs, looking defeated. Caption: When you try to scam Shaq, but he got more power than you ever will. Shaq burst out laughing. His assistant texted, Interview requests are pouring in. Everyone wants your reaction. Shaq just shook his head. He didn't even need to say anything. The video spoke for itself. Shaq chuckled, tossing his phone onto the couch. Man, he said, shaking his head, the internet's gonna have fun with this one. Daniel sat in the cold, dimly lit interrogation room, his hands cuffed to the metal table. The walls were blank, no distractions, just silence, except for the faint ticking of the clock on the wall. For the first time tonight, there were no cameras, no crowd, no escape. Daniel sighed, rubbing his temples. He was screwed. Just then, the door swung open. The police chief walked in, a broad-shouldered man in his late 50s, his badge gleaming under the fluorescent light. He tossed a thick folder onto the table and crossed his arms. You're in a world of trouble, Daniels. Daniels swallowed hard. Look, this was just a misunderstanding. The chief ignored him, flipping open the file. Fraud, impersonating an officer, attempted extortion, resisting arrest. He glanced up. Should I keep going? Daniels shifted uncomfortably in his seat. I was desperate, okay? The chief's expression didn't change. Desperate, he scoffed. So you decided to dress up like a cop and scam people out of thousands of dollars? Daniels opened his mouth, but nothing came out. The door creaked open again, and in walked Shaq. The room suddenly felt smaller. Daniels looked up. His face turned pale. Shaq leaned against the wall, arms crossed, his massive frame nearly blocking the doorway. Well, 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 Shaq said, shaking his head. That attitude you had before, where'd it go? Daniels stammered, searching for words. I didn't mean for it to go this far. Shaq chuckled. Oh, so what? You just wanted me to hand over $5,000 and walk away? Daniels hesitated, then nodded quickly. Yeah, man, I wasn't trying to hurt nobody. Shaq's smile vanished. You weren't trying to hurt anybody. His deep voice echoed in the small room. He stepped forward, looming over the table. You pointed at my car, told me I had a warrant, grabbed my wrist like I was some criminal. Daniels lowered his gaze. Shaq took another step. How many people fell for it, huh? Daniels swallowed hard. A few. The chief slapped. The folder shut. Try over a dozen. Daniels' head snapped up. What? The chief leaned down. We pulled up security footage, Daniels. Bank records, witness statements. You didn't just try this on Shaq. You pulled this stunt on regular, hardworking people. Folks who actually got scared. Who paid you because they thought they'd go to jail. Daniels' mouth went dry. Elderly couples, single moms. You even tried this on a young kid whose only crime was having a broken taillight. Daniels shook his head rapidly. I didn't know. Shaq let out a low chuckle. Oh, you didn't know? He turned to the chief. Hey, chief, you think the judge is going to believe that? The chief smirked. Not a chance. Daniels started panicking. Come on, man, I can fix this. I can pay them back. Shaq raised an eyebrow. With what money? Daniels froze. The chief sat down across from him, his face stone cold. You're facing serious time, Daniels. Fraud, impersonation, extortion. Hell, we might even be able to hit you with kidnapping charges for trying to shove Shaq into your car. Daniels' breath hitched. But I didn't kidnap anyone. The chief shrugged. You tried. That's enough for a solid case. Daniels was officially spiraling. Look, I was desperate. My job, my money, it's all gone. I was just trying to get back on my feet. Shaq scoffed. By knocking other people down? Daniels clamped his mouth shut. The chief leaned in, lowering his voice. And guess what? Daniels held his breath. Shaq's pressing charges. Daniels' entire body stiffened. His eyes darted to Shaq. Wait, you don't have to do that, man. I swear I'll never do this again. Shaq shrugged. Yeah, nah. You made your choices. Daniels looked back at the chief, his chest rising and falling rapidly. I, I can cut a deal, the chief smirked. Oh, you'll get a deal, all right. He stood up, motioning to an officer outside. Get him booked. We're done here. A pair of fresh cuffs clicked onto Daniels' wrists. Daniels slumped forward, completely defeated. Shaq watched as the officer dragged Daniels out of the room. The chief shook his head. Well, Shaq, another scammer taken down? Shaq cracked a small smile. Yeah, and something tells me the internet's not done roasting him yet. The courtroom was nearly empty as Shaq stepped out into the bright afternoon sun. The Daniels case was over. Justice had been served. A reporter rushed up to him, microphone in hand. Shaq, any final words on the case? Shaq adjusted his jacket, sighing. Man, some people never learn. Daniels had been sentenced earlier that day. 3 years behind bars for fraud, impersonation, and extortion. You think he'll ever change? The reporter pressed. Shaq glanced toward the courthouse, shaking his head. I don't know. That's up to him. But fake cops ruin real trust. And people like him, they got to be stopped. The reporter nodded, lowering the mic. But for Shaq, the fight wasn't over. Later that night, Shaq sat at his desk, scrolling through his phone. The internet had exploded. The video of Daniels' failed scam had gone viral worldwide. News anchors laughed. Talk show hosts cracked jokes. Even celebrities were reacting. Dude really thought he could arrest Shaq? One tweet read, Shaq didn't just reject the bribe. He called the cops on the fake cop, another joked. But between the memes and jokes, something more serious stood out. Real people, real victims, were coming forward. A single mother posted, This guy threatened to tow my car last year if I didn't pay him cash. I was scared. I didn't know he wasn't real. An elderly man shared, Daniels told me I had unpaid tickets and almost took my license away. I paid him everything I had. Shaq exhaled sharply, his fist clenching. Daniels hadn't just targeted him. He had scammed innocent people who couldn't fight back. Nah, man, Shaq muttered. This ain't just about one guy. He grabbed his phone and made a different kind of call. 2 days later, a huge donation landed in the hands of the National Police Training Fund. $250,000. Shaq wasn't just exposing one fraud. He was helping train real officers, supporting programs that focused on rebuilding public trust. When reporters asked him about it, he kept it simple. You want to wear a badge? Earn it. The news spread fast. Communities took notice. Police stations across the country started cracking down on fake officer scams. Even the FBI launched new awareness programs to warn people about frauds like Daniels. The next week, Shaq sat down for an exclusive interview. Shaq, you exposed a fake cop and made national news. Any final thoughts? Shaq leaned back, flashing a small smile. Yeah, real power isn't in a fake badge. It's in real respect. Not everyone learns their lesson, but those who do, they make the world better. And sometimes one person standing up is all it takes to spark change.